accidentally drank too much and ended up alone with my hubby's dad. I wish it stopped there. Hello, Reddit. Long-time lurker, but this is my first time posting. I'm using a throwaway account because I really don't want this associated with my main. I'm in desperate need of advice right now, and I don't know where else to turn, so here I am, sharing this with strangers on Reddit. Even though I know this might not be the best place for serious advice, I can't talk to anyone in my personal life about this. No friends, no family. So Reddit is basically my only option. My name is Eva, and I'm a 30-year-old woman. My husband's name is William, and he's 29. William and I have been married for a little over 2 years, but we've known each other since college. We met when I was a sophomore and he was a freshman, and honestly, it felt like we clicked instantly. It wasn't like those drawn-out love stories you hear about. From the moment we saw each other, something just worked, like we were meant to be in each other's lives. I know it sounds cliche, but it really did feel like love at first sight. We moved fast, faster than most people would probably say is reasonable, but when you know, right? Within a few months, we were practically inseparable, spending most nights at each other's places, planning our futures together. Before long, we were talking about marriage, and it just felt right. Like it was the next step in this perfect relationship. William is the kind of guy people dream about. He's always been so loving, caring, and supportive. He goes out of his way to make me happy, to make sure I feel safe and loved. I never thought I could find someone as perfect as him. He's the dream husband, the kind of man who never forgets an anniversary, who surprises you with flowers just because, and who actually listens when you talk. He's patient, kind, and he works hard to build a stable life for us. I truly couldn't ask for more. William has always been the perfect husband, and that's exactly why I feel so guilty about everything that happened. He's the kind of husband people dream about. Attentive, loving, always there when I need him. We've always been that couple, the one people envy, the one people wish they could be like. We seem perfect together, and for the longest time, I thought we were. It's hard to even admit to myself how wrong things have gone. I know it sounds like I'm making excuses, but maybe putting this out there will help me make sense of it all. William comes from a wealthy family, old money, the kind that's been passed down for generations. He's the oldest son, and with that came a lot of expectations. His family is very tight-knit, the type that's always having family dinners, hosting events, and going on group vacations. They welcomed me with open arms from the moment I walked into their lives, and I quickly became one of them. It wasn't the intimidating, cold kind of rich family you sometimes hear about. They were warm, inviting, and they really embraced me. William's been groomed for years to take over his father's company. His dad's the current CEO of a successful business, and everyone just expects William to step in when the time comes. Because of that, we lived close to his parents. Really close. I'm talking practically next door. We saw them all the time. Family dinners, spontaneous visits, Sunday barbecues, you name it. It was a lot, but I didn't mind at first. They were lovely people, and it was nice to feel so included. Plus, it made William happy, and that's what mattered most to me. But then there was William's dad. Let's call him Peter. Peter was the definition of charisma. He walked into a room and people noticed. He wasn't just wealthy. He had this presence, this way of commanding attention without even trying. There was something about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I found him slightly intimidating at first, but that was only because he had this air of authority about him. He was charming in a way that was effortless, like he could make anyone feel special with just a smile or a casual comment. And, well, I always had a bit of a crush on him. It was harmless at first, just a silly little thing. I never thought much of it. I mean, who wouldn't have a tiny crush on someone like Peter? He was handsome, successful, and had that whole powerful older man thing going on. I chalked it up to being normal. After all, it wasn't like I was the only one who noticed how attractive he was. Everyone talked about Peter like he was some sort of silver fox. It was just a tiny crush. That's what I kept telling myself. But over time, I started realizing that it wasn't as small or insignificant as I wanted it to be. Every time we were around each other, I felt this weird tension. I ignored it for the most part, thinking it was all in my head. I mean, he was my husband's father, for God's sake. There was nothing there, I told myself. It was just admiration, that's all. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was something that would pass. I kept telling myself that it was something that would pass. It had to pass. I mean, what kind of crazy thing was this? How could I be having a crush on Peter, of all people? I was married to William, the love of my life, the man who had always been so good to me. And Peter? Peter was married to his wife, William's mother. He was my father-in-law, for God's sake. The whole thing was just absurd. I thought it was one of those fleeting crushes that people get sometimes, something harmless that would fade with time. It had to fade with time, right? I couldn't act on it even if I wanted to. It was stupid, really. Peter was untouchable in that sense. He wasn't some random attractive guy I could admire from afar. He was part of the family, an ever-present figure in my life, and I wasn't going to let a crush ruin everything. So I tried to ignore it. I ignored the fluttering in my stomach every time he smiled at me. I ignored the way my pulse quickened when he casually touched my arm or laughed at one of my jokes. I convinced myself that it was just admiration, nothing more, and if I pushed those feelings far enough down, they'd eventually disappear. After all, I loved William. I adored him. He was my husband, the person I had promised to spend my life with. This crush was just a distraction, a ridiculous, inappropriate distraction. Every time that weird tension crept up, I shoved it to the back of my mind. I ignored the way Peter's presence seemed to fill the room, how I felt overly aware of him whenever we were alone together, even if it was just for a few minutes. I kept telling myself that it was all in my head, that it was nothing more than an overactive imagination. If I ignored it well enough, it would just go away. But no matter how much I tried, it didn't go away. In fact, it only seemed to grow. And that's what terrified me the most. It wasn't like I was consciously doing anything to feed these feelings. I was trying my hardest to stay away, to keep things normal between us, but I couldn't deny that every interaction with Peter left me feeling unsettled. It was like I was living a double life in my own mind, one where I was happily married to William, and another where I couldn't stop thinking about his father. I told myself that I was overreacting, that I was just imagining things, but deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't going away. It was only getting stronger. The more I tried to suppress it, the more it seemed to consume me. And the scariest part was, Peter didn't seem oblivious to it either. There were moments, fleeting but unmistakable, where I thought he felt it too. A lingering glance, a playful comment, a hand resting just a little too long on my shoulder. But of course, I told myself I was imagining things. I had to be. I really thought if I just ignored it, this ridiculous crush on Peter would go away. I hoped it would. I mean, what else could I do? Besides, Peter never gave any indication that he was interested in me in that way. He was always nice and warm, but he was like that with everybody, so I tried not to read into things. I convinced myself it was all in my head. It had to be in my head. Then came that night. It was a special occasion, a family gathering of sorts. We were celebrating something. I can't even remember what anymore, but everyone was there. Jake had to leave early, though. He got an unexpected work call and had to rush off, leaving me with Peter, my in-laws, and a bunch of other guests. The party continued even after Jake left, but I started feeling this weird sense of awkwardness. Without my husband there, I felt out of place, so I did what I always do in those situations. I started drinking. Not too much at first, just enough to ease the tension, but I didn't stop at one drink, or two, or three. As the night went on, the guests began to leave or drift off to bed, one by one. My mother-in-law called it a night, my sister and brother-in-law headed off, and before I knew it, it was just Peter and me sitting by the fireplace, chatting like we often did. At this point, I was very drunk. I could feel the alcohol buzzing through me, but I was enjoying Peter's company. He was warm and charismatic as always, and we were bonding. He was telling me stories about his younger days, and I found myself laughing, feeling so at ease around him, too at ease maybe. And then, I don't know what came over me. I really, really think it was the alcohol, because I can't explain my actions any other way. For some reason, my drunk brain thought it would be a good idea to make a move on Peter, to make a move on my father-in-law. I don't know why I did it, or how I even mustered up the courage, but the next thing I remember is leaning in to kiss him. I can still feel the heat rising in my face as I think about it now. The humiliation. I tried to kiss Peter multiple times, and he kept rejecting me, pushing me away, trying to leave the room. But I wouldn't stop. I was relentless, determined to do something that should never have even crossed my mind. I remember ranting about how much I wanted him, telling him how I had always had a crush on him, how no one had to know, and how it could just be our little secret. Peter was horrified. He kept telling me to stop, kept trying to distance himself from me, but I wasn't listening. The alcohol had clouded my judgment completely. I just wanted him to feel the same way I did. I thought if I just kept pushing, maybe he would relent. Maybe he would want me too. But of course he didn't. He finally managed to break away, telling me firmly that this was wrong, that I was drunk and not thinking straight, and that nothing could ever happen between us. I can still hear his voice in my head, that tone of disappointment and shock. He told me to go to bed, that it was late, and that I would regret all of this in the morning. And he was right. The next morning, I woke up in bed with a pounding headache and that awful feeling of knowing I had drunk way too much the night before. But at first, I couldn't quite remember what I had done. My mind was foggy, and I felt this weird sense of dread, like something terrible had happened, but I couldn't put my finger on it. William didn't seem to know anything either. He told me that Peter had helped put me to bed, that he'd arrived home just as Peter was leaving my room, and that everything seemed fine. I asked him if I had done anything embarrassing, and he laughed it off, saying that Peter didn't mention anything, so it was probably nothing. But deep down, I knew. I knew I had done something awful, something I couldn't take back. There was this gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach, a heavy weight that made me sick with shame. It was like my body was trying to reject the truth, but no matter how hard I tried to push it down, the reality kept creeping in. I desperately tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought, that maybe I hadn't crossed that big of a line, but it was just wishful thinking. We got an invitation from my mother-in-law for dinner at their house that night. I tried to decline at first, thinking of any excuse not to go, but then I changed my mind. Maybe if I saw Peter again, I could gauge the situation, maybe even talk to him and explain myself. I convinced myself that it would be better to face it head on. The moment I walked through the door and saw Peter, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The look on his face, stiff, strained, was all the confirmation I needed. That was when it hit me. The memories came rushing back like a tidal wave, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered everything: the alcohol, the advances, his rejection, my desperation. It was all so vivid, and I felt like I could crumble from the embarrassment and horror. I could barely sit through dinner. I was so self-conscious, my hands shaking every time I picked up my fork. My heart raced every time Peter spoke, even though he avoided talking directly to me. It was clear he was making a conscious effort to avoid me, which only made me more nervous. I couldn't stand it. I had to know where we stood, if he was going to keep what happened between us a secret. So later that night, I sent him a text, short to the point. I asked him to please keep what happened between us private, that I was sorry for everything. But he never responded. Days went by, and the silence from Peter was unbearable. I kept checking my phone, waiting for any kind of reply, but nothing came. I started to panic. Did he block me? Was he so disgusted that he didn't even want to acknowledge my message? I was terrified that he would tell William, that my entire marriage would come crashing down. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time William looked at me, I felt like he could see right through me. The guilt was suffocating. I tried to talk to Peter again, tried to find moments where I could pull him aside, but he was always one step ahead of me. He was actively avoiding me, keeping his distance. Every time we were in the same room, he'd find an excuse to leave. It was frustrating, and the more he avoided me, the more anxious I became. I felt trapped in this horrible limbo, not knowing if or when he was going to blow everything up. The worst part was the waiting, the not knowing if Peter was going to tell anyone, if he was going to tell William. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, just waiting for my world to collapse. For a while, I was certain that my days were numbered, that William was going to confront me at any moment, but as more time passed and nothing happened, I began to calm down. I realized that if Peter had wanted to tell William, he would have done it by now. William wasn't the type to keep things to himself. If he knew, he would have confronted me immediately. He's never been one for games. But there was nothing. No suspicious questions, no cold stares, no changes in his behavior. It was then that I started to believe Peter wasn't going to say anything. Maybe he was just as eager to bury this as I was. Maybe he didn't want to cause trouble for the family. The relief that washed over me when I came to that conclusion was overwhelming. I finally allowed myself to breathe, to believe that this nightmare might actually go away. But as much as I tried to calm myself, that sense of guilt never fully left. I still saw Peter regularly, and every time I did, that look of disappointment in his eyes reminded me of what I had done. But despite that, I thought things were finally going to be okay, that I would be able to move past that night and bury the shame once and for all. It seemed like Peter had decided to keep it quiet, and with each passing day, my fear of William finding out slowly faded. But I was wrong, so very wrong. It all came crashing down when Peter told William. It was a normal day, or so I thought. Our mother-in-law had invited us for dinner, but I was feeling a bit under the weather, so I declined. William, on the other hand, went. He checked in on me before he left, making sure I was fine and able to stay home on my own. I reassured him that I was okay, and off he went. When he returned, I immediately noticed something was off. He was unusually quiet and seemed tense, maybe even angry. At first, I assumed something must have happened at dinner. I tried asking him about it, tried to comfort him, but he brushed me off. He didn't want to talk, and the silence between us was thick with tension. I convinced myself that whatever had happened, he just needed time to cool off, and that he would talk to me later. But later came, and it was worse than I could have imagined. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, William finally confronted me. He couldn't hold it in any longer. He was angry, really angry, and the words he spoke hit me like a freight train. Peter had told him. William knew everything. He couldn't believe I had made a move on his dad. He said it was the reddest flag he had ever seen, that it was beyond disrespectful and unforgivable. I tried to explain myself, to tell him I was drunk, that I didn't know what I was doing, but he wasn't having it. He said being drunk wasn't an excuse. Alcohol just brought out the parts of ourselves we try to hide. He told me that my actions were proof that I had been thinking about Peter for a long time, that I had probably been eyeing him behind his back for God knows how long. I tried to deny it, tried to make him understand that it wasn't like that, but William saw right through me, and there was nothing I could say that would change his mind. The argument was brutal. He was disgusted, hurt, and angry beyond reason, and all I had was the excuse that I had been drunk. To him, that wasn't enough. He refused to accept it as a reason for what I had done. We went round in circles, getting nowhere. He kept telling me that making a move on his dad was the lowest thing I could have done, and all I could do was try to convince him that it wasn't as calculated as it seemed. I didn't know what else to say, didn't know how to fix it. Eventually, William had enough. He left the room, went to sleep in the guest room, but before he walked out, he told me that he wanted me out of the house the next day. I thought he was just saying it out of anger, that by morning he'd have calmed down and we could talk things through properly. But I was so wrong. The next morning he was still furious, and there was no reasoning with him. He barely let me pack my things. It all happened so fast. He was cold, distant, and firm. He wanted me gone, and nothing I said could change his mind. I was shocked. I tried to plead with him, to explain myself, to beg for forgiveness, but it was like I was talking to a stranger. The man I had married was nowhere to be found. He kicked me out despite my begging, my crying, my desperate attempts to make him understand. With nowhere else to go, I stayed with my best friend for a few days before heading back to my parents' house. It's been weeks now, and I haven't heard a single word from William. He won't pick up my calls, won't answer my texts, and it's not just him. His entire family has cut me off. I've reached out to all of them, tried calling, messaging, anything to explain, but nothing. The silence is unbearable. And the worst part is that my own family and friends keep asking what happened. They want to know why I've been kicked out, why my marriage has fallen apart, and I haven't been able to tell them the truth. How can I? How do I tell my parents that the reason my husband kicked me out is because I made a move on his father? The thought of it makes me want to curl up in shame. I'm so confused, so lost. I don't know what to do anymore. The guilt, the regret, it's all too much, and I have no idea how I'm going to get through this. Update. Hello, Reddit. Well, I forgot to say first of all, I definitely did not expect the kind of response that I got on my last post. The traction has been absolutely crazy. I figured I'd get a couple of comments here and there, but the reality is way beyond that. The comments just kept pouring in, and there were so many, over 2,000 and still counting. It's honestly overwhelming, and I've tried my best to read through as many of them as possible, but it's been hard to keep up. Unfortunately, not a lot of the comments have had good things to say about me, and honestly, I get it. A lot of people really roasted me and laid into me, and I'm not even going to dispute or refute any of that because, well, I know I deserve it. This is all my fault, and I'm not trying to make excuses for what I did. I know I brought this on myself, and I'm fully aware that I deserve every ounce of criticism that I've received. That being said, a lot of you were asking for an update, and some people even sent me DMs requesting that I share what happens next. So, I guess here's the update. After weeks of silence and being completely ignored, I finally managed to get in touch with William. And it took a lot. I knew his schedule pretty well, so I decided to confront him when I knew he'd be heading to work. I literally stood in front of his car as he was trying to drive out. I was desperate. I didn't move, and I told him we needed to talk. He couldn't avoid me this time. He finally gave in and brought me back into the house, which honestly gave me a tiny bit of hope. He even made me some coffee, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe he was softening up, that maybe he was starting to forgive me. We sat down and had a very long conversation. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life. But despite how calm William seemed in the beginning, it quickly became clear that he still wasn't going to budge. He hadn't changed his mind at all. He told me point blank that he wanted a divorce and that there was no way he could ever forgive me for making a move on his dad. He said he stood by what he'd said before. Alcohol doesn't create those kinds of feelings out of thin air. It just brings out parts of people they've been trying to hide. He was certain that if I hadn't already been thinking about his dad, there was no way I would have made a move, drunk or not. And honestly, his logic was flawless. I had nothing to argue back with. I couldn't defend myself because deep down, I knew he was right. All I could do was apologize over and over again, but it didn't make a difference. William told me that trust was shattered, that he couldn't look at me the same way anymore. He said the image of me trying to seduce his father was burned into his mind, and no amount of apologies or explanations could erase that. He asked me a question that really shut me down. Would I have forgiven him if he had done something like that to my mom? Or if he had cheated on me while drunk? The truth hit me hard because I knew the answer. I wouldn't have forgiven him. There's no way I could have. So what could I say to that? Nothing. And that was it. William was set on getting a divorce, and I had no argument, no defense. I was heartbroken. I still am. I had something so good, so perfect, and I ruined it with my own actions. I've lost everything, and it's all because of the choices I made. There's no one else to blame but myself. So yeah, we're getting a divorce. I feel shattered. I don't even know how to process it all right now. I don't know what my next steps are going to be, but I just wanted to give the update since so many people asked for it. I guess this is what happens when you make terrible choices. You lose the things that matter most. Update. Hello, Reddit. So, I didn't really think I'd be updating again, but I kept getting a lot of DMs asking for one. So I figured, why the hell not, right? A couple of things have happened since my last post, and to be honest, it's been a roller coaster.
Never.
First of all, I got served divorce papers a couple of weeks ago. I'm still just trying to process that. There's a huge difference between just knowing something is going to happen and actually seeing it physically in your hands. Seeing those papers, it made everything real in a way that just thinking about it didn't. I thought I had mentally prepared myself, but holding those papers in my hands made it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was in a bad place for a long time after that, and if I'm being honest, I still am. Things got so bad that I was even confined for 72 hours in a psychiatric hold. I'm not really ready to go into too much detail about that, but yeah, I guess I'm just sharing it because I know some of you have been asking about my mental health. It's been rough. I mean, William was my soulmate. or at least I thought he was. I really believed we would spend the rest of our lives together, and now I'm just trying to figure out how to survive each day. Second, I went back to William's house with my parents to pack up the rest of my stuff. I didn't have much left there, but my parents came along mostly for emotional support. They know everything now, and honestly, they're disappointed in me. They were horrified when they found out that I made a move on my father-in-law. I mean, my dad literally said to me, "You were obviously thirsting for him even before you were drunk." That stung, but he's not wrong. They also support William, which makes sense because they believe what he said, that alcohol doesn't create those feelings. It just brings out the ones you've been hiding. So yeah, my parents are disappointed, to say the least. Horrified even. But at the same time, they're still trying to be supportive, as much as they can be, I guess. It's a weird mix because they don't hide their disappointment at all. I see it in their faces, in their eyes. But at the same time, they're still my parents, and they're helping me pick up the pieces of my life, even though I can tell they're not proud of me right now. When we went back to William's house, it was awkward, to say the least. Peter, my father-in-law, or should I say ex-father-in-law, and Jane, my ex-mother-in-law, were both there. It was so uncomfortable. They barely even acknowledged me or my parents. They just kind of nodded at my parents, and that was that. There was no small talk, no awkward pleasantries, just silence. I packed up the rest of my things as quickly as I could. Like I said, there wasn't much left, but still, the whole thing felt surreal. These were people who had once loved me like their own daughter, who treated me like family. Now, it's like I don't even exist to them. It's wild how quickly things change. One minute I had a second family who loved me, and now they act like I never existed. I don't even know how to describe it, just crazy. Honestly, I've just been trying to survive each day. Some days I feel like I can barely move forward. It's this strange feeling, like I'm stuck in this limbo where I'm not even sure how to be okay again. And what makes it even worse is that I have no one to blame but myself. There's no one else involved that I can point fingers at. No one did this to me. I did it to myself. And then sometimes I wish there was someone else to blame, because then maybe I could at least tell myself it wasn't my fault, that someone else was responsible for this mess. But no, this is all on me, and I hate that. I hate that I have to carry the weight of this on my own shoulders, that I'm the reason my life has fallen apart. It's a lot. So yeah, that's where I'm at, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces and move on, trying to figure out how to live with the fact that I'm the one who ruined everything. Thanks for reading, I guess. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been a while. Honestly, I've just been trying my best to survive. I didn't even remember this post until I stumbled upon it in a TikTok video. That was when I was like, oh yeah, I need to update everyone, so here I am. Also, when I logged back in after what feels like forever, it was such a weird feeling. It's like midnight right now. I'm exhausted, trying to fight off sleep, and I'm here typing this because I've owed you guys an update for so long. I literally forgot about it, but now that I remember, here's what's been going on. First of all, the divorce is finalized. It's done, finished, over. We were only married for 2 years, so I didn't qualify for any sort of spousal support. We didn't have kids, so child support wasn't a factor either. There were no shared assets between us. Everything he had was his, and I didn't really have much of my own, to be honest. So, yeah, that was it. The divorce is over, and with it, my whole life as I knew it. It still doesn't feel real, even now. I told myself I would spend the rest of my life with William. He was the person I was so proud to be with, the person I thought I'd grow old with. And now, we're just done. Over. I still haven't processed it, and to be honest, I'm not sure I ever will. Some days I wake up and think it's all just a bad dream, like William will be there next to me, and this whole nightmare will disappear. Other times I feel like I'm stuck in some messed up simulation, and any minute now, I'll snap back into my real life. But nope, this is the real world, and this is my real life. As for me, well, I've just been here. Floating, I guess. I've been trying to get a job, but it's been hard. I've always struggled with people and socializing, and now it feels worse. I've mostly been keeping to myself. My parents have been taking care of me, but I can tell they're getting frustrated. They've started dropping hints about how I need to get a job, start paying rent, and pull my weight. And honestly, I get it. They've done so much for me, and they probably expected me to be in a different place by now. I've been looking for jobs, though. The thing is, no matter how bad you feel, life doesn't care. The world keeps spinning, and you have to find a way to survive. So yeah, I'll probably end up working soon whether I want to or not. I don't really have a choice. We all need to survive, right? I hate myself. I hate how things turned out. I hate that it's all my fault that I ruined everything. I hate William for not forgiving me. I hate Peter for telling William. And I hate myself for even trying to blame other people. I keep going in circles, replaying everything in my mind like a broken record. How did I let it get this far? How could I be so careless and selfish? William was my partner and my best friend. We had plans and dreams, and now they feel like they've all disappeared. It's like I set fire to the one thing that made me happy. I see his face in my mind, the disappointment and pain written all over it, and it tears me apart. I can't escape the guilt. Every day feels like a struggle. I wake up and see a stranger in the mirror. The person looking back at me is filled with shame and regret, someone who threw away something good for a moment of weakness. I keep replaying the conversation with William in my head, the way his voice broke when he said he couldn't forgive me. I think about how he used to look at me with love and how those warm eyes turned cold. I hate that I was the one who caused that change, and I've tried to move on and convince myself that I can become a better person, but every time I start to believe it, the weight of my actions crushes me. I feel like I'm drowning in self-hatred, and I can't seem to escape it. I've lost the love of my life, and now I'm left with the mess I created. Sometimes I wonder if this is what I deserve, a life filled with pain and regret. It feels like my punishment, a constant reminder of how much I hurt someone I loved. And while I know I should learn from this experience, it often feels like I'm stuck in a cycle of negativity. I hate that I'm like this, and that I can't seem to break free from it. I keep hoping that one day I'll find a way to forgive myself, to make peace with the past. But right now, all I feel is anger. Anger at myself, anger at the situation, and anger at the people who have been dragged into my mess. It's exhausting, and I don't know how to move forward when I'm so trapped in this darkness. I just wish things could have been different. I wish I could take it all back. So that's where I'm at. Just trying to exist, trying to survive, even on the days when I don't want to. I don't know what's next for me, but I'm just taking it one day at a time.